going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Movie Crusaders. My name is Sean Wasserkrug, and today we're going to be reviewing the latest film to hit both theaters and HBO Max, Tom and Jerry. Now, for me as a kid, Tom and Jerry was always a staple. You had Tom and Jerry, you had the Looney Tunes, you had the Coyote Roadrunner. Tom and Jerry was right there with them. It was a fun, harmless. They're always hurting each other, but it's a fun cartoon between a mouse and a cat that are an all-time feud. I mean, this eventually also became, kind of the staple point to The Simpsons with their Itchy and Scratchy. I mean, it was basically a play off of Tom and Jerry, but now we're getting I wouldn't say live action. I mean, it's basically live action to a point, film between these two characters. Now, I will admit, seeing the trailer for this, it was one of those things where I wanted to see it, not because it looked good, but because of nostalgia for these two beloved characters. Tom being the cat, Jerry being the mouse, people who don't know. Plus, with the cast, you got Chloe Grace Moretz, who, like I said, I like Chloe Grace Moretz. You also got Michael Pena, who's always great. And then you got Colin Jost. You've got Patsy Farron, who I haven't heard of prior to this film. And then you got Rob Delaney. Most people know Rob Delaney from Deadpool 2. So, I mean, cast-wise, I mean, it's decent enough to support the two main characters of Tom and Jerry. The general plot of this film is we finally see how Tom and Jerry are first introduced to each other in modern times, and how the feud between the two rightfully began. But the other subplot of this story is we follow the character Kayla, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, who is basically a woman trying to find her way in the world, trying to find a job that basically makes her feel wanted. And she basically comes into this hotel. I'm blanking on the name of the hotel off the top of the head, but it's a big luxury hotel. And she basically steals the resume of a woman who's applying for a weekend job as a coordinator for this big, massive wedding. Thus, she gets hired, and through setting up this event for the wedding, Tom and Jerry show up at the hotel, and it's her job to try and get rid of Jerry. So she hires Tom, as ridiculous as that sounds, she hires Tom to help her try to get rid of Jerry, so hopefully she could keep the job longer than the weekend and find a place that really feels like home to her. That's basically the main plot of this film. Now let's get into the stuff that probably is not what you want to hear. If you're a fan of Tom and Jerry, you're going to love the Tom and Jerry moments. They basically, anytime Tom and Jerry is on screen, you're going to get the same wild little antics that you got from them back in the past. The nostalgia between them two in a modern setting works for the most part. It does not work in the latter part of the film, especially when they start doing very modern things like using Instagram. Cat and mouse using Instagram together really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the main problem is just like you see in like a Godzilla film, they are so focused on making the humans the main part of the story, and the two titular characters, Tom and Jerry, the kind of the background setting of this main story. And that is basically where the problem with this film lies, is just like with a Godzilla film, people come to see Tom and Jerry. Just like people come to see Godzilla. They don't want to see a human story that, frankly, no one really cares about. Chloe Grace Moretz does a great job as Kayla, and had the story just been she's getting hired at the hotel and she's trying to keep her job, and her job is to try to get rid of Jerry, and she uses Tom, that's fine. That's a solid B story with humans that still keeps Tom and Jerry at the center front. But the problem is that they make this whole other subplot of this big, lavish wedding. And the whole point of Kayla's job is to make sure this wedding goes on without a hitch, and Tom and Jerry are constantly causing issues. And that is the problem, is that when we get to the third act, that becomes the focal point of the story, is this wedding, Kayla's job, and then Tom and Jerry are just kind of there. And you kind of just lose what the essence of this film is. Colin Jost, I love Colin Jost on Weekend Update at Saturday Night Live. He is not a good actor. He needs to stick to Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, where he's just reading off a teleprompter, because his acting is wooden. He has no emotion at all throughout this film, even when he's supposed to. I will say Patsy Farron, or not Patsy Farron, I'm sorry, I'm saying the wrong name the whole time. Pallavi Sharda, I probably said that wrong. She plays Preeta, which is Colin Jost's bride. I think she was solid in her role. I mean, she doesn't do anything incredibly over the top that makes her this great performance, but I think she does decent in her small little parts. Patsy Farron, she plays Joy, the Bell Girl. Her whole part of her character is that she's just quiet and creepy to everybody, which I feel is kind of an unfair characteristic for this character. But just because I mentioned her at the beginning, I'm going to say my piece about her, and that was basically it. Michael Pena is basically playing kind of the sleazy hotel guy who doesn't believe in Kayla, who's trying to get to the bottom of this. I mean, we've seen that character 1,000 times before in better films. I like to say Kayla's fine, and then Rob Delaney's just kind of there as the boss that doesn't see what's actually really going on, and la-di-da, that's the rest of his story. It's a very paint-by-numbers story that you probably have seen many times before, whether it's Dunstan Checks In or many other films with animals kind of in the background of craziness happening. The other weird part about this film is that every animal is animated, and everyone in this world seems to be okay with that. It seems to be kind of almost like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit world where everyone just seems to be all right and understanding that animals are animated that can talk. I don't think they ever really clear up that you can understand what they're saying, because pretty much every animal outside of Jerry has a speaking role in this, including Tom. Tom at one point sings. He doesn't talk at all the rest of the movie, but he has a full-on singing performance, which to me was horrible because you never let Tom and Jerry talk. But it's one singing performance. It's not the end of the world. But every other animal in this world can talk except for Jerry and Tom, and it just doesn't make sense. They have these rapping pigeons that start the movie off, which right from the get-go is like, oh, this is not going to be good. And then they keep interjecting throughout the film. They have no purpose. There's these alley cats that are like a gang that are after Tom throughout the most of the movie, which serve no purpose in the grand scheme of the film except for just to add more animals. I mean, you got Spike. Spike's a normal character in the Tom and Jerry verse, so he's fine. But it's weird that the world around these human characters is that every animal is animated and can talk, and no one seems to bat an eye at it. So it's kind of just a weird world you're just thrown into, and you're supposed to accept it right off the bat, which once you do, it doesn't necessarily make the movie better. You're just kind of, it just is off-putting. I mean, at one point, like Chloe Grace Moretz Kayla, she has full-on conversations with Tom and Jerry. She basically can understand them through charades, which I think is kind of, I at least like that part of it because it makes more sense because, like I said, Tom and Jerry are not supposed to talk, but yeah, somehow Kayla's able to understand what they're trying to say. There's a subplot for a potential love interest for Kayla. Once again, not touched on enough to be important, but for some reason they try to throw that in there. The main problem is with Tom and Jerry is outside of Tom and Jerry's antics, which are fun for the most part if you like Tom and Jerry, the rest of the plot of this movie does not matter, nor do you care. And it eventually pushes Tom and Jerry to the wayside. And you're watching basically this human story that you don't care about. Like I said, if it had just been a focus on Kayla trying to keep her job and her trying to catch Tom and Jerry, that at least is a stronger story and probably would have been a better movie than throwing this whole lavish wedding with all this other crazy antics that frankly are not good. They're not worth watching. And basically it's just kind of a bummer because it's boring. Because Tom and Jerry, like as good as they are, they kind of just feel like they're on autopilot, like the rest of this film through most of it, because it's all stuff we've seen before. Now, I will say this, I am being pretty harsh, but the real question is, Sean, is this movie good for children? Because let's face it, it is a children's film. And I would say that it's very 90s in a modern setting. Like I said, Tom and Jerry use Instagram, which is just utterly ridiculous. But will kids of today like Tom and Jerry, the movie? Yeah, I would say so. If all of us growing up through the 90s, like I said, Dunstan Checks In, I keep using that because it's a hotel film with a monkey. If they like those kinds of movies or they like Tom and Jerry, the kids will probably still enjoy this film. You as an adult will probably have to turn your brain off because the logic going on in this film is redundant and frankly just pointless. But nonetheless, as a kid's film, Tom and Jerry works for the most part, but as a film in itself, it is very poorly done. Like I said, the jarring every animal animation and you just accepting that world and all the animals talking except for Tom and Jerry, well, except for Jerry, all that stuff, it's just there's too many head scratchers wondering why this was a choice instead of just accepting it to really make this movie really worthwhile for anyone above the age of 10. And even then, that's probably a stretch. I'd probably say more like 8. But nonetheless, I said Chloe Grace Moretz, she's fine in the film. I think she actually does a good job playing against Tom and Jerry, even though there is one really bad scene where you can tell she doesn't quite know where Tom is in terms of like where she's supposed to look, because obviously they're probably using a tennis ball for her to look at. And there's one part where she reaches out for a high five, and she's so far off the course of where Tom is that they literally had to animate Tom over to her. It's very awkward. They should have just reshot the scene, but they didn't. Shows the laziness of this film overall. So going to my overall score, I'm going to give Tom and Jerry a 44%, which is a D. D grade. Like I said, as a kids movie, it does a decent job, but as a film as a whole, it is definitely a disappointment for fans of Tom and Jerry. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you guys did, go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys feel like this review is worth sharing, go ahead and hit that share button. But most importantly, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to the channel so you guys stay up to date with all the latest videos that pop up on the Movie Crusaders. And don't forget to follow us on all the social media outlets you see below. Coming up next, we actually have a lot of good movies coming out here in the next month. I'll pop them up real quick. Outside of Tom and Jerry, we got Tom Holland's Cherry. We got Tom Holland's Chaos Walking, back-to-back Tom Holland films. We got Eddie Murphy's Coming to America. We got Hulu's Boss Level. We got Disney's Raya and the Last Dragon. We got Godzilla vs. Kong. Can't wait to see that. We got Zack Snyder's Justice League. And we got Bob Odenkirk's John Wick's Nobody. So we got plenty of reviews coming here very, very soon the next month. So be on the lookout for those. And then, of course, like always, every Friday, check myself and Brian Michaels as we bring you the Weekend Crusaders, where we talk about 5 films that came out in that weekend in movie history. So be on the lookout for those episodes. We've been really enjoying doing those, and we hope you guys enjoy watching them. And until next time, in case we don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, and good night, Movie Crusaders.
You're still here? It's over. Go home.